Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Front Door. I'm Scott Benedict. As someone who has spent decades in the retail business, specifically as a retail merchant, I've seen firsthand how consumer expectations have evolved and shifted in recent years. Sustainability, transparency, and brand purpose aren't just buzzwords anymore. They're, in fact, table stakes in the eyes of a rapidly changing and evolving consumer base. Now, at the same time, e-commerce and digital marketing have given emerging brands unprecedented access to audiences around the globe. That's a powerful combination, but it's also created higher stakes for the companies that really want to make a meaningful impact in the world. That's why I'm so excited about today's conversation with Bryan Welch, one of the leading voices behind the Consumer Impact Summit, an event that's coming here to Northwest Arkansas, September 16th through the 18th at the Ledger in downtown Bentonville. This event is designed to bring together founders, marketers, retailers, and investors who believe commerce can and should make a positive difference in the world. Bryan is a veteran media and brand leader with decades of experience helping purpose-driven businesses connect with consumers in authentic ways. He's passionate about the intersection of sustainability, innovation, and storytelling, three things that are central to the mission of the Consumer Impact Summit. And Bryan, welcome. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Scott. I'm glad to be here.
Good. Well, so welcome, and let's kind of start off the conversation. Tell me a little bit about the vision behind the Consumer Impact Summit and what makes this gathering kind of unique and special and different than maybe things that have happened like this in the past.
Sure. Well, the people behind the concept of the summit are small group of B corporations. B corporations are companies that are certified by an independent organization for their positive impact on the environment and on people. And this group of B corporations includes 8th and Walton, which is a Bentonville-based company and a B corporation. And the idea was, to make a difference in the world, through business, the most fundamental thing that has to happen is consumers need to make buying decisions based on the impact, based on the values of the companies that they're doing business with, the products they're choosing. And so from our perspective, the consumer products industry is the industry most fundamentally engaged in making those differences in the world through business, because those are the companies that are driving buying decisions on the part of the customers. And so we thought an event like this that focused on consumer product companies might be extremely valuable. And we were very excited. Northwest Arkansas has, I think, probably the most concentrated community of entrepreneurs, of businesses. I mean, the Northwest Arkansas is a hotbed for business activity, especially in the consumer products industry. And when we started planning this event last September, there were only 2 B corporations in Arkansas. And so there are 7,000 B corporations around the world. So that larger community of purpose-driven companies, that larger cohesive community of purpose-driven companies was not well known, I think, and didn't have a lot of connection with this super important region. And although almost every business person I know in Northwest Arkansas is running a company that's based on their values, and there's a strong sense of that kind of purpose in the Northwest Arkansas business community, but they were largely unaware of that larger cohesive community of purpose-driven businesses. So we thought, well, if we had an event in Northwest Arkansas bringing the purpose-driven business people of Northwest Arkansas into direct contact with purpose-driven business people from around the world, we thought it'd be a really rich opportunity for trading information, for building new relationships, and for strengthening both of those communities in a purpose-driven direction.
It makes a lot of sense, and obviously, living here and working in this community, I get the same sense that you do, that there's something really exciting going on here. And I want to explore a little bit this concept of purpose-driven commerce. Why are we seeing more brands and more retailers prioritizing impact and sustainability? And how does this event, the Consumer Impact Summit, how do you propose the event will really address this concept in this growing movement?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Business is by far the most powerful organizer of human energy that's ever existed. It dwarfs every other realm of human activity in terms of the engagement of people around the world. Almost everybody around the world engages in business in some way, shape, or form. Most of us working in business, and of course, everybody else buying things and selling things. And yet, business is a concept that's only maybe 300 years old, 250 years old. And, it's easy to forget that. It feels like business has always been around. But as a concept and defined in the way it is today, it's a very young thing, a new thing. So, some of us, our perspective is that business has been in a kind of adolescence. And we all remember being an adolescent where we weren't super conscious of the impacts our decisions would have, right? We weren't super conscious of the impact we were having in the world. And of course, as we grew up, that became more and more important to us and more evident. And so from my perspective, business has sort of been in its adolescence. And there's been this idea that if you only have one priority, and that's shareholder value, if you only have one priority, that's making money, that's the end of the story. Well, consumers are increasingly pointing out to businesses that isn't the end of the story, and that the business's value system matters, and how it treats people matters, how it serves its community matters, what it's doing to the environment matters. And as that consumer awareness has grown, businesses are waking up to the fact that you can improve your financial bottom line by taking a look at a couple of other bottom lines. That is, what is the net impact of my business on people? People meaning employees, suppliers, the community around us, and the environment, which of course ultimately has a big impact on everyone's lives. And so consumers drive the movement for sure. The other aspect of it, of course, is, I've been very fortunate to have worked my whole 45 career in purpose-driven businesses. And it's more interesting and more fulfilling to run a business that's serving your values in an embracing way. In other words, if I go to work every morning thinking I have a chance to improve the environment, to improve people's lives, it's just more interesting and more fun than focusing solely on a financial measurement.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting. As a former retail merchant and buyer, I can recall some of the early days when the light bulb came on, if you will, for us in our understanding of how a retail business or a consumer brand could use their size and scale for positive outcomes, that you can do well by doing good, I think was one of the ways we thought about it back then. But in some cases, it felt like when you as a retailer were working with suppliers, there were some cases where you really had to push suppliers to think about sustainability, ethical sourcing, things of that issue, while there were other companies that we did business with that quite frankly were ahead of us, that they perhaps were multinationals that in other parts of the world, they'd had this awakening perhaps before we had it here in the U.S. And I'm curious, as you have seen this kind of awakening and this thought about, yes, we still want to run a good business, we still want to make a profit, but we can do good by doing positive things in the world. Have you seen this evolution kind of unfold the way perhaps that you have thought, and is it helping brands to connect with their customers perhaps in new and more authentic and perhaps deeper ways?
For sure. And, it's definitely, awareness has definitely grown, but I often think about Quaker Oats as a brand. Why was it called Quaker Oats? Well, it was called Quaker Oats because there was a tradition in America of Quaker business people being honest and values driven and good people to do business with. And if you wanted to, the people who initially branded that product understood that association, and they knew people when they sat down to breakfast wanted to trust the place and the people that their breakfast was coming from. And so, when we did business with a small circle of business people in a village or a small town, we obviously gravitated toward the business people we trusted. And so I think the roots of all this go way back into that very fundamental motivation of being able to trust people we do business with. And there's clearly a great opportunity for adding value to your product if you can raise the trust that consumers have, not only in your product, but in your company. And so all of these things converging, along with some, with other social movements that some of them, but not all of them, antagonistic to business, is, I think, awakened all of us to the opportunity that's presented to run a business that has strong values, that is transparent about its value system, and that makes business decisions based on these larger impacts our practices have. So, yeah. And, well, I certified my first B Corporation, which is just one measurement, but I think it was 2008. At the time, we were the 8th B Corporation. Today, there are over 7,000 B Corporations around the world. And so, as one illustration of how this awareness is expanding, it's right there.
No, that makes sense. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I was always taught as a business person, first as a merchant and now as I do consulting work, is to always be a student of consumers and consumer insights. And one of the things I have seen a lot of data on is that younger consumers, Gen Z, perhaps, and then Gen Alpha, who's just coming into adulthood, that they arrive on the scene of their peak adult spending years a little bit more conscious and thoughtful about the choices that they make and the products that they carry, that they buy, and the retailers that they do business with. Is that your sense as well, is that we have a generation of consumers coming into perhaps the mainstream of their spending years and making choices a little bit more thoughtfully and perhaps with more information than earlier generations of consumers had?
Oh, for sure. And it's fundamental to them. They don't, the young people today, I think most young people today, seldom make a buying decision without reference to what the impact of that buying decision is going to have in the world. And a lot of that impact is created by the practices of the company that created the product, right? Another thing I noticed, particularly in Gen Z and Gen Alpha, is they're willing to do without things if they feel by owning something they're doing damage to the environment or damage to society. They're willing to do without. So we have increasing numbers of young people who don't own cars and who do their best only to use bicycles or public transportation. and it's fundamental to them. They don't think of it as something innovative or new they're doing. They just, I don't think they understand why one wouldn't take all of these impacts into account when we do business with any organization.
No, that's interesting, and it kind of aligns with some of the data that I've seen and have seen in real world practice as well. One of the things we talk about on this podcast is how e-commerce and digital retailing have kind of leveled the playing field a little bit. Brands that once would have struggled to get on a physical store shelf in a large retailer now can build direct connections with the consumer, test new ideas, even drive their way onto a physical shelf through digital interactions with the consumer and creating digital demand. How do you see, Bryan, kind of how digital marketing and e-commerce are enabling purpose-driven companies to perhaps scale faster, more effectively, and reach an audience, not only just to get awareness, but even to educate a consumer on why their product is a good choice for a consumer?
Right. Isn't it interesting? That's such a great question and such a powerful concept. From my perspective, today every company is a media company, and I've worked most of my career in the media industry. But any company that's not adept at telling its own story today is apt to underperform, because we are all in every industry called upon to tell that story. And a big, very compelling stories come out of our practices as they impact the environment and the people who create our products. Those are powerful stories. They reach out around the world. If we're making a chocolate bar with chocolate that's with cacao that's being grown and processed by people who are well paid in wholesome organizations, and we're elevating the lifestyles of those people wherever they might be, in Belize or in Ivory Coast. Well, that's an extremely powerful story associated with our chocolate bar. And we can build an audience around stories like that. And audiences drive sales. So, yes, I think most fundamentally, every kind of enterprise has a new opportunity to establish itself through storytelling, because the media is wide open and we're all participants now. And purpose-driven companies in particular have a huge opportunity, because their stories are interesting in and of themselves. You don't have to be particularly interested in agriculture to be interested in a story about the people growing that cacao, because it's inherently interesting, it's inherently compelling, and can create a customer base made up of people who might not particularly have been connoisseurs of chocolate before, but who are compelled by the story and enjoy having that particular brand of chocolate in their home because of the stories that support it. So yeah, I think that's a wonderful question and a wonderful rabbit hole to go down.
Indeed. We talked at the beginning of this conversation about how Bentonville and Northwest Arkansas are quickly becoming a hub for important conversations like this, for purpose-driven commerce. And part of that, as we mentioned, is given life by the fact that we have a very vibrant retail ecosystem here. Tell us about the event that's coming up at the Ledger in September, and why you believe that having this event is so timely and so important right now in the history of retail and of consumer commerce.
Well, as I said before, there is no more vibrant business community than Northwest Arkansas's, and I've done business all over the world, And I've never encountered a more energetic and vibrant business community than the one that's there. And the consumer product industry is where the rubber meets the road when you talk about purpose-driven companies, because it's the industry that's driving those buying decisions that's the base and that are the basis for all of this purpose and impact conversation. The event, we expect about 300 people. We have around 45 speakers. They come from big companies and small. There are Mondelez is one of the big companies. Danone it has somebody coming. Cabot Creamery has several people coming to the event and presenting. Down to much smaller startup companies that have fascinating stories and interesting things to share. Nargo is a Bentonville-based company that builds cargo bikes from the frames of discarded bicycles. And these are very innovative cargo bikes. They have a bike that's designed to carry a wheelchair. And so you can drive your wheelchair right up onto the bike and go wherever a bicycle can go while sitting in if you have that handicap, sitting in your chair. There's a company called Lives In. It's a very exciting startup outdoor clothing company based in Bentonville. And super interesting story. They're one of the new B corporations. Onyx Coffee Labs is a brand new B corporation, and they'll be there and talking about that company and how it's evolved. So, and the conversations will be about, how we manage our supply chains to have the most positive impacts. How do we manage our financial relationships to have the most positive impacts? The founder of Climate First Bank is going to speak, and one of the things that, and a number of people from the financial industry, and one of the things they talk about is, where does your money spend the night? What is your capital being used for when you're not using it? And, banking decisions can have a big impact in the world. Packaging is the subject of a panel at the event. And of course, there's some wild and wonderful new stuff happening in packaging. People are finding ways to reduce the amount of plastic that we're engaging for packaging and convert that to materials that can be more easily recycled and have a more positive impact in the world. So it runs the gamut, but those are some of the topics that will be addressed.
Well, that sounds neat. I'm curious, based on how the agenda is unfolding and the type of companies, who do you think really is the ideal attendee? Who do you think should attend an event like this? Is it brands, investors, retailers, marketing people, perhaps all of those things? And what do you think that they will take away from the event when it's over?
My experience with events is the most valuable thing I take away from events is the network of new relationships. And so, it's not to be modest about the quality of the program, which it's turned out you can find it on our website, consumerimpactsummit.com, but we have really fantastic presenters. But of course, we're also trying to allow a lot of opportunity for people to meet each other and share insights in networking settings. And I think there's a lot of value to be produced there. And events of this kind, yes, there's a lot of value in the content, a lot of specific ideas and recommendations, supply chain management, data management, new packaging options. All those things are sort of hardcore information that you can use to improve your company and your product. But inspiration is always part of it too. These stories are stories of people who've taken risks, made big investments in having a positive impact in the world through their businesses. And then they've made it happen. They're operators. They're people who've made the compromises they needed to make or invented new things when something didn't exist. And those folks are just generally inspiring. And I know I'm going to have a great time at the event because it it raises my energy level, and it's a joyful thing to see people engaging in the world through business in a way that makes a positive difference. It's fun.
I would imagine, and I'm obviously looking forward to the event myself for all of those reasons. You touched a little bit about your own career journey in some of your earlier comments, but I'm curious if you kind of help the audience understand a little bit about your journey, why purpose-driven commerce, and this, why you became passionate about this as an area of business, and why you've really gotten so involved in it, and kind of leading the charge, if you will, to educate and engage people in some of these purpose-driven type businesses.
Well, I started my career in the community newspaper business. I ran small town newspapers for 15 years. And that business was always infused with a sense of purpose, social purpose. We thought we were doing good in the world, and that made that business exciting and interesting. Whether I was selling advertising or writing stories or whatever I was doing, it was more interesting because it had a positive purpose. And so I think my main motivation then, as I got out of that business and did other things, was to continue to have that sense of purpose when I went to work in the morning. It made my life more joyful. It made it more rewarding. And it was a hell of a lot more interesting than going to work every morning just thinking about how I can add a decimal point to a line item, or subtract one. And I like business. I like the fact that what we're doing is getting measured all the time. I like the fact that the mandate is to get stuff done, not just to weave new ideas together, although that's part of it. Not just to develop deeper and deeper levels of knowledge in our area of specialty, although that's part of it. But we're called upon as business people to get something done every day, to make something happen in the world. And I like that. I've always liked that. And so I stayed in, I've been a business person my whole adult life. And I've had that sense of purpose in my businesses for all my adult life. And I'm super grateful for that because it is incredibly fun every day. It's energizing and super interesting.
That is so neat, and it kind of inspires this last question I want to pose to you. Part of my career journey, it was actually teaching retailing at Texas A&M, and one of the things I used to tell students about careers in retailing and consumer products is beyond the ability to earn a good living and have career growth opportunities. Retailing and consumer products was one of those career choices where you could have an impact in the world. In other words, as a merchant or as a marketer or as a product developer, you could bring to market new and innovative ideas and have an impact on what the consumer has access to, what they can see. And so I say that to kind of pose this question to you. If you could give advice to a young person, perhaps someone who's in college today, thinking ahead to their career choices in some aspect of retailing or consumer products, what advice might you give them as they're thinking about the career choices that they have in front of them?
Yeah, I think I would say, know what matters to you, what really matters to you, and then find work that serves that greater purpose that matters to you, and stick with it. Because, regardless of what your particular technical skill base might be, there is work for you out there that makes a positive difference in the world. In the long run, you will wake up happier and go to bed happier and be happier during all the hours in between if you have that sense of purpose in your work. And I recommend it highly. And don't work for bad people.
That's always good
It's
advice.
always been a good rule. Yeah.
Well, Bryan, that is awesome, and I thank you so much for joining us today. To our audience and everyone listening, the Consumer Impact Summit is happening September 16th to the 18th at the Ledger here in Bentonville, Arkansas. If you care about building brands with a purpose, driving sustainable growth, and connecting with others who share your values, I think this event is someplace that you're going to want to be. And as Bryan mentioned earlier, to learn more or to register for the event, go to consumerimpactsummit.com. And we'll obviously show a link in our show notes when we publish this episode. I have to say, from a personal standpoint, as someone who was a retail merchant on the buying side of retail for a number of years, I believe strongly that purpose-driven commerce is not just some trend. It is, in fact, a movement, and that brands and retailers who get it right will not only grow, but have an impact, a positive impact in the world through the process. And so something to think about. Again, Bryan, thank you so much for joining us, and for everyone who tunes into the Digital Front Door. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep building a great future for retail. And thanks for watching.